Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. On this episode of the podcast, this is your check-in for motivation, inspiration, and education on your journey to success with myopia management. And I have my regular returning champion guest co-host, Carrie Herzberg. Carrie, welcome back to the Myopia Mindset.
Great to be here. Great to be here, Matt.
Yeah, and Carrie, the reason why you're on this episode is you and I normally do the supporter episodes, and you've brought to me a series of great conversational topics, one of which last time was a study, and you put another study in front of me, and I was like, this is great. Let's talk about it, because there is so much going on in this study that it would make a great episode of the podcast.
Yes, I agreed. It stirs thought.
Right.
And that's what I like most about these things. And if you look inside of it and start pulling it apart a bit, there are really some really amazing things and things you can take from this that, go forward with it. So it's, and it gives a viewpoint of myopia management and Ortho-K that, you get another snippet of it from a different window. So you want to, it's really hard to have a 360-degree view of everything, right? So you need these different viewpoints. So I think it helps us as clinicians to look at how the geneticists look at this thing, the genetics of it. And I have to admit, that's not my strong point. I didn't get much of it in school, and
sure.
And so I'm like a novice on this stuff too. But I made some good notes, so maybe we'll work our way through it. And I'm looking forward to some of the conclusions we can talk about, which will, I think, move the field forward, actually, to be honest about it, because I think there's some really cool stuff here.
All right. And before we get started, if you have any questions about anything we've talked about in this episode, or really any other episode of the Myopia Mindset, feel free to leave a comment wherever you found this podcast. Definitely rate and review us. You can reach us directly, myopiamindset@gmail.com. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, go to myopiamindset.substack.com. That's where our paid supporters give us their real life money to help us advance the mission of this podcast, spread the good word about myopia mindset, and dig into these great topics. Carrie is an excellent guest for this topic. He has over 50 years of experience. I grew up in his practice. He's a myopia management guru. He's an Ortho-K legend. He has inspired and taught some of the most successful orthokeratologists in myopia management today. And let's dive into it, Carrie. I got a summary that I put together, which states that a recent study published in Eye and Vision reveals that the effectiveness of orthokeratology lenses in controlling myopia progression in children may be influenced by genetic factors. Researchers analyzed data from 545 children aged 8 to 12 and identified specific gene variants associated with slower axial length growth, a key indicator of myopia progression. Notably, variants in genes related to retinal diseases such as RIMS2 and LCA5 were more prevalent in children with slower myopia progression. These findings suggest that genetic profiling could help predict which children are more likely to benefit from orthokeratology lenses, paving the way for personalized myopia management strategies. And if that doesn't get you excited,
that's a mouthful, I tell you what.
If the prospect of that doesn't get you excited, because it is a mouthful, but it's a dense study with a lot of great reward in it for our industry.
I was really envious when I saw this thing. I do reviews for them.
Okay.
So I said, why didn't I get this one? I'd love to have reviewed it, but I didn't get, I've got one on works right now. But so I was envious of that, because this is really a dynamite study. Let's do a little background, Matt, on this thing. Wenzo Medical College is where this was published. The doctors down there, I've been down there many times. I don't know if our listeners realize it, but they started the 5-year professional MD degree
Hmm.
at Wenzhou. That was in China. That was a push there, and they were really a force behind that. They're really one of the forces in eye care in China, and they have an amazing facility down there. So they really were promoting, optometry and an MD level there in China. So very impressive. And Dr. Mao down there, and Professor Liu, and the others who have done their work down there
Yeah,
to
I was
put
going to
these
say I
things together.
recognize some names on this
Yeah,
study.
yeah, they're all our friends, right?
Hmm.
So 1,500 Ortho-K patients they looked at here, a retrospective study. So that was, that where do you get those resources here? I mean, or are you going to get 1,500 patients? I've had over 10,000 in my lifetime, as to give the reader some kind of a balance here. But my practice is probably on the very cutting edge of Ortho-K as far as utilizing Ortho-K. It was an Ortho-K, almost exclusive Ortho-K practice for many, many years. So this is an amazing numbers, a retrospective study. Uh, the children in the study were ages 8 to 12. The prescriptions varied from -1 to -6, and prescription 1.5 adapters to cylinder. The two groups that they analyzed, Matt, were they had a rapid progressing group. First off, the study was only 1 year, and some of the some of the conclusions were that they need a more longer term study than this. So it was only over 1 year, but they had two groups that they divided some of their participants in. One that showed rapid progression of 0.33 millimeters or more, and one that had slower progression of 0.09. And they equally divided these two groups. This was not the maximum. This was not happen to everyone in this Ortho-K group. This is people they isolated. These two groups that didn't respond as well. And don't we know it, in practice, that we have these patients that don't seem to, it's
Right.
not right. It's not
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I'd love to, when I talk to doctors, I'd love to, kind of like, it's kind of like the patient that came in that thought they were perfect and they found out one ear was an inch back with the other
Yeah.
one, they're not really very perfect at all. So we know that we have these patients around that don't respond, and why is that? So here we go with the study that's kind of nailing some of that stuff for us and kind of like closing some of the questions that we had, uh,
Right.
for that.
Yeah, there's always been this kind of X factor, in my opinion, to orthokeratology. Like we know, like you often state, like 80% of the time it
Right.
works just fine for most,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
patients that are candidates for the treatment, right? But then there's always these patients where on paper they should be a slam dunk, or you can follow the treatment plan. We did this, then we made an adjustment, we saw improvement, and then this happened. Why? Right?
Right.
And I was talking about this with my wife today as I was passing our your grandson, my
Yes.
my newborn, my 2 month old off. When I was going to get ready,
The
I'm like, this
cutie.
is this is huge for our industry, because to suggest that the treatment results could be impacted by these genetic
Mm-hmm.
factors
Mm-hmm.
is like, that's, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like unveiling a whole new layer of this
Oh,
that didn't exist before.
yeah. And
You know?
the crazy thing about all this is that we know that we in the field who know what the resources are that we have available, we can actually still utilize our resources, our design, and our goals to actually overcome some of this stuff that's going on, even if we have one of these genetic variations. And we'll get into that a little bit. But yes, it's remarkable to get. It's like a fresh air. Breeze of fresh air to get, and then that to find out, okay, this is maybe it's just not me. Maybe I'm dealing with something that's really fun at a fundamental level. Some of the things about the study said that they quoted this thing, the non-synonymous variants, which are basically ones that actually do physically change the genetics, were very common in this slow myopia group. The slow myopia group, to give the listeners a little bit of a background on that, the slow myopia group is a group that responded well, but they had higher spherical equivalence. They had usually longer axial lengths, and they were older. So they were the ones that, as we know, as we keyhole this in Ortho-K, right? We're going to turn this right around. Ortho-K, basically if you don't do anything to engineer a lens, it gets better as the prescriptions rise higher because of the maximum height of the reverse curve gets higher with higher prescriptions. So this automatically slows the myopia. And that's basically the conclusions were in the study too, that these older patients that had developed higher prescriptions. were also managed better, but they also had all these changes with these non-synonymous variants that happened. In other words, their genetics, this myopia is changing the proteins, it's changing the genetics,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is,
It's fascinating.
yeah.
Like I must admit, like I'm not an optometrist, I've been in this industry for 20 years. A lot of this is over my head, but I am able to, pull little pearls out of this. And I was just like floored by this information.
Can we now kind of get down to this, that this is a disease process?
Yeah.
Can we get over that this is not just a refractive condition, but it's a disease process?
This long overdue.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's long overdue.
Do you think that this is going to help push that forward?
I think it can't help but do that. Yeah,
yeah.
I
I mean,
do.
it clearly shows that, it clearly pushes that whole disease argument. I've possibly over the finish line. Hopefully I'm not being too presumptuous, but like, this is just the kind of information you needed to help,
right.
make that case.
Yes, it is, scientifically speaking, the genetics of it are very commanding, as far as what it's talking about, as far as what myopia and its devastating effect on the human eye, in the retina. There were also some other interesting tidbits out of this study that, I found kind of interesting. One of them was that there were these different changes that occurred. Some of them had different aspects of points that they affected the eye with. They spoke of these things. They thought the LCA5 variant actually was more involved with the eye tissues, but it was also very common. And I should say this, that we're talking about rod cells here, not cones for the most part. These variants do affect rod and cone physiology, but it's rods that are especially susceptible to this, which is something we've been, since Earl Smith got done. He says it's peripheral, guys. That's mostly rod vision. It's not macular. It's not cone driven. This is rod, which was a whole like revolution in thinking on what drives this. We used to think the macula is all everything, the center vision, the 20/20 vision, but it's not. It's coming along for the ride. It's basically the rods that are figuring on this, predominantly. And this is what this study said too, that both of these are affecting the rod mostly. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's kind of interesting too is that one of them they called the RIM S2, and the RIM genetics affect the photoreceptors. They affect the firing of the photoreceptors, and these variants then are affecting that firing that when they go off, and then send the message to the brain. So this is obviously, by affecting that negatively, affects the effects that the Ortho-K lens does for the eye, which is basically, and here's another cool thing they're talking about: hyperopic defocus centrally, myopic defocus peripherally. This is how they described it. You saw that, right? Okay. Now this is like mind bending if you start to think about this. We've talked about the aspects of hyperopic defocus as far as its peripheral effects on peripheral retina, causing the eye to grow. Obviously, we've been talking about doing myopic defocus, which is meaning bringing the image cell inside the retina instead of beyond it. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the macula. We found, in my work, and Eddie Chow particularly, did that 5-year study. We found that using higher Jessen factors, right, and especially in lower myopes, which is the group basically that's more susceptible here as far as the axial length growth, is the causes, by doing a higher Jessen, you're causing more change in your Ortho-K lens, which is increasing your reverse curve, right? But what it's also doing, you're using Jessens of maybe 2 or 3, that's causing hyperopic defocus centrally. And one of the things that people speculated on, he said, maybe this lack of axial length elongation is because the confusion is caused between a stimulus like hyperopic defocus centrally and a myopic defocus peripherally. The eye doesn't know what to do. It's got 2 different stimulations there, and that results in a stagnant situation where the eye doesn't change.
Right.
That's a theory now. Nobody's ever proven that, but here you go. So we found in our work and Eddie's work predominantly that using these higher Jessen factors in lower myopes basically worked really well as far as axial length suppression. And guess what? I would get the question all the time: what are these kids going to do with if they're hyperopic during the day, right? Well, guess what? We might want them hyperopic during the day because we might want some more hyperopic defocus centrally. Yes. So and we found, again, just to follow up with this, we found many of our kids were very able to, this is a young person with amazing amounts of accommodation. And for those cases that couldn't deal with this properly, well, then, vision training, right?
Right.
Clean it up
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah, this is I mean, Jessen factor has been a sticky subject in the modern myopia management era, in my opinion. And I think it's simply because a lot of new to myopia management, new to Ortho-K doctors specifically, just don't know about it or are extremely hesitant to use Jessen factor. And I remember, being in the field and talking about, I mean, it was called compression factor
Right.
when Johnson and John with the ability lens, had to say compression factor because that's how it was listed in some academic journals. That's fine. I grew up with it as Jessen factor. And I remember having these conversations with, my accounts with
Mm-hmm.
doctors. How do you feel about Jessen factor? Would you feel comfortable using Jessen factor? And, to be perfectly honest, the majority of them, if they came around to it, was for high myopia cases. Like those
Mm-hmm.
are the cases that would consider using Jessen factor.
Right.
Because I wasn't telling them specifically, here's what you should be doing. Let's have a conversation about it. What do you know and what don't you know? And then what do you want to do going
Yeah.
forward?
Yeah. I think if we pause here for a moment just to describe why, for those who don't understand what Jessen factor is,
Go for
what
it.
it is.
Yeah.
Sure. Basically, in Ortho-K, when you have a 2 diopter myope and you want to change the 2 diopters and flatten the eye, if you just change the 2 diopters, let's say you had a 4200 flat K and the -2, you flatten it by 2 diopters and you'd get 4100 as your flat K result from that. However, if you did that, then that patient would then during the day change somewhat during the day and become myopic again, and you didn't want that. So the Jessen factor was first put in place by guess who? Dr. Jessen himself, Wesley Jessen. I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but he was quite an outstanding individual in the field. This would be the equivalent of then adding a necessary additional flattening so that the eye would remain hyperopic and not myopic during the day. So commonly speaking, in the old days when you were just correcting myopia, you'd talk about Jessen factors of a half or 3/4, maybe 1. And that was in the formula. So if you had a 2 diopter myope who was 4200 flat K and you ended up changing that patient with a +1 Jessen factor, then that would be 3 diopters of change on the cornea, which would result in 3900 being the flat K. So that's where the Jessen factor came into place. Now, what we found out about it was that, guess what? That Jessen factor increased the amount of myopia you were treating, and inadvertently raised the reverse curves, elevated them, because they were the bridge curve that brought the flat cornea back to the alignment again. And it's that magical reverse curve that causes the mid peripheral defocus that results in the myopia being controlled. So at least theory wise, in this theory, it does.
Right. And I would use the Paul Gifford example from Myopia Profile. It's an excellent resource if you want to take some classes on Ortho-K. They have virtual platform you can do that with, and the way Paul describes it is that he uses the couch cushion example. Like you sit on a couch cushion, you create a small divot. When you get up and look at it, you can see it slowly filling in. If you were to sit in that same fixed position, in the exact same position all day, and then stand up, it would take longer for that divot to fill in. I would use that as an example for Jessen factor. We want to keep the results of orthokeratology treatment like consistent and reliable throughout the day. And like I was saying, it was those low myopes that most new to Ortho-K doctors were squeamish when it came to Jessen factor. The primary reason is what you said. They didn't want to make the kid hyperopic. And it's like you make the perfect solution statement to that problem, which is like, look, the kid can handle it. And if a kid can't handle it, then you have a vision treatment patient that and then look, it's a win-win situation at that point because then you know what to do next. And I got to be honest with you, like when it comes to a lot of Ortho-K lenses, Jessen factor is built into the lens design, in my understanding. Is that correct?
It is. Most lens designs have a Jessen factor, but the thing is that doctors don't realize that they can change that. Actually, they do. They have multiple choices for Jessen factor. They don't have to take the one that they're given. If they want more, then they can ask the lab, what they have available, and they could increase the Jessen factor as needed. I found the biggest thing that, in working through J&J and others is consulting with them, that the biggest problem was they were underutilizing the Jessen. It wasn't high enough.
Right. Yeah.
So, they were using it in the case of you would for someone who's in their late 30s or early 40s, that you don't want to make, you don't want to make them hyperopic during the day. But
Right.
these kids can focus through almost anything. They're warriors. They can do, they can press that accommodation system however they want to.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, there's a method to add compression factor for the ability lens.
yes,
The last time I worked with
that's our efforts to get that done succeeded.
Your efforts for sure. Yeah, I remember. I remember I remember those days. You were huge on Jessen factor.
Oh,
you
my
were able to
gosh.
show the results of it, and it had a great impact on that lens. And I remember working with some accounts where I'd be like, "You should start using this compression factor option, and here's why." And the way I finally got them to consider it would be like, "Hey, look, just use it on kids who aren't driving." Like, let's start there. Like,
Yeah,
if you're
it's a
that
large-
concerned about it, if the kid is driving age or older, then you use your own, however comfortable you're with it. But like, don't sleep on these kids, and because you can often get better results from using Jessen factor, quicker results. You can get a better fitting lens with Jessen factor. Like, the benefits of it are tenfold in my opinion.
Right.
As long as you know what you're doing, and as long as you know how much you should be using. And that's something that a lab should be able to help you out with. Like, that should be a no-brainer for them. If you're like, "Hey, let's talk about Jessen factor. How much can I influence with this lens?" They should be able to guide you through that process.
Yes. Yeah. And there were several other things that that were interesting out of the study. And one was that they had a couple of variants that actually they thought were responsible for actually high myopia in youngsters, the unusually high myopia. And they thought these were genetic variations, which again beckons us to, if you get something that's really, off the charts here and it's a very young patient, you need to get that genetic testing to see if they have some there's an underlying genetic problem here that you want to then deal with on a different level. So some of these cases just, are not going to be your typical myopia progression cases, but even more involved with that. So that was effective, on that score entirely. The other, the things that just pop out at you here from what they were doing is the fact that, look, if you talk about myopia research, and you talk about myopia control research, and you talk about, there's nothing like Ortho-K. I mean, maybe atropine has some pretty good bases too, but Ortho-K, I think, is the king here, the ruler as far as research and studies that have been done that have documented the benefits of Ortho-K for myopia control and just the wearing of Ortho-K lenses. So I think, that again was something I thought that really came out strongly here. And, there were conclusions that they had with the study that I found, some of them were things we already know, like, for instance, that eyes grow faster when patients are younger and slow down as they get older.
Right.
They said that's natural slowing. And, older kids can do really well with Ortho-K, as far as control, with the Ortho-K lenses. And so that, means, you think about this. When do we stop treatment? I've never had this real problem. As you might have this in a dual focus soft lens practice or even glasses, because it's a question about, when do you stop treatment? With Ortho-K patients, they just basically want to continue wearing the lenses because it's freedom, man. So I don't want to wear glasses. I don't want to wear contacts during the day until there's LASIK that's available, or they continue wearing Ortho-K. So it's never been a problem. But, here it is that the older kids need myopia control as well. That's what they're saying here. And then Ortho-K does really well with that. And we've been blessed in Ortho-K because we don't have to really worry about it, because patients just want to continue wearing them anyway. There's very few patients actually ever, in my experience, ever drop out of it. They just continue doing it, even into their 30s and 40s, which is really something. So the old, we see this happening. So, these are all things that we knew, coming in, that they were then, stating this as, I thought it was good that we got this reinforcement and stating of these things that, maybe not everybody knows about this,
Yeah.
The other aspect of this, which I kind of tickled my thought processes here, they were using 4 curve lenses, both from 2 manufacturers. Okay. And they found no physical difference between the 2 lenses as far as the axial length control between these 2 curved lenses. Now, this is an area I think that's really kind of interesting, because as you get into higher prescriptions, and dealing with that, you necessarily, with Ortho-K, at least in my experience, I found that I needed to go well beyond 4 curved lenses. I mean, and if you just think about it for a moment, an eye that's becoming more myopic or getting more myopic is an eye that's flattening, and the cornea a lot more than a typical eye that's, less so, more eccentricity on the eye. And this requires larger alignment curves with changes in alignment curve, because the eye is, you need to break that up a little bit. And of course, your reverse curves need to be multi-curved because they're getting steeper because the prescription is rising. And this is, just right out there. So the interesting thing is they were using 4 curved lenses here. And, Eddie did his study and showing the benefits of 6 and 8 curved lenses as far as controlling axial length. It was, superior. And if you're going to, in the other standpoint, if you're going to use smaller optic zones, okay, by their very nature, they're going to make larger peripheral, larger alignment curves. Reverse curves will have to be increased a little bit. And this is going to require you to break up these curves a little bit more, because, the eye changes. It would be, I think, to think about it, if you're trying to fit this larger area, with one curve, you're going to have a tougher time doing that. So all of this is talking about multi-curved lenses beyond 4 curve. So here we are, that they're talking about these changes and what they're dealing with, and they're making their recommendations. And some of these things, we as Ortho-K doctors have done this already. I mean, we are, right? A lot of the research now is smaller treatment zone sizes, multi-curve, 6/8 curved lenses, and steeper reverse curves, and higher Jessen factors. And this is such wonderful stuff, even just to talk about it, because I don't know if the listener can grasp this at all, but you're dealing with something in your hands, that allows you to change an outcome for a patient. I mean, we've talked about this before, but I mean, here's a human being. This is a progressing human being that's developing these genetic defects because of myopia, and you have a chance to do something about that, to change it for the better, and you have the tools right in your hands. The controlling factor is what? How much you can learn and grow. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that.
Yeah. I mean, this was, man, this study 10 years ago, if we had had this information, think about that.
Well, wait a minute. I'll go back further than that. We're talking mid 1990s when I was running NERF. And we're talking about nothing there. We were pleading to have an FDA study, and we had doctors advertising and got in trouble with the FTC because they were promising things that we couldn't deliver, permanency that wasn't permanent. And so we had to deal with that, and get to this, we wanted studies, but the only way we get a study is if we got a clearance that was safe to wear. The first studies that occurred, after FDA approval, and the God bless that, Paragon for going after it, man, and getting that done. That was a huge turning point in everything. And after that got done, the studies came out, and what were some of the first studies? Is it safe to do a study?
Right.
With these kids, because at the time, mid 1990s, there were plenty of doctors around that said, you shouldn't be fitting kids with contacts.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's not safe, And here I was doing all this with Ortho-K, at the time. So it was like at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah. If you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. You can do so on our Substack, myopiamindset.substack.com. I'll see you at the next one.